This is also a really great time to stop and drink some beer while you're cooking with beer. It's very like circle of life, all encompassing. Also, I mean, you're not going to see as much family for the holidays, but if you're able to enjoy them, it's a way to get through it. Hey everybody, my name is Lewis. I'm the executive chef over at Glass House and Parallel, and today we're working with Modist, and we're going to be doing a little baking. We are going to be making a cranberry upside down cake with beer caramel sauce, and we are going to be using Modist false pattern. We're going to use it because it has a nice citrus notes to it and it's a little fruity, so that's going to work really well with our cranberries and our cake, which is going to have a little citrus in it. So we are going to start by making our caramel. So we are going to start with 1 can of false pattern. We're going to get that in a small to medium saucepan. And all we're gonna actually do right off the bat is we're gonna start boiling that. We're gonna reduce it a little bit and then we're gonna add our sugar in. So we're gonna get that on about high heat. And so what we're gonna do with this caramel is we're actually gonna use it 2 ways. We are gonna be using some of it actually for the baking of the cake, and then we will reserve about 3/4 of it and usually use that to put over the cake when we're done. And this will just take a minute or 2 here to come up to a boil. And while that happens, I'm gonna crack open a beer. So while this is boiling, I'll go over our ingredients for this. I have everything already meased out, which I recommend everyone do beforehand. So for this, we have some light brown sugar, heavy cream, butter, vanilla extract, and salt, and of course, our beer. So I am a firm believer in cranberries. I believe they're one of the most underrated things to bake with. I also think that beer, when people think of it a lot, they think of like beer cheese, and I think it makes for like a great dessert if you use the right one. And it actually really bothers me that you can only get fresh cranberries around the holidays. They are all year round. And the other great thing is that we're doing a little bit of orange in this, and there's a lot of citrus in the beer, and the holidays is actually when citrus season is. So like your oranges, your grapefruits, all of that are actually gonna be like their best in like the December to January area, and it's also when you can find like the biggest variety of them. So it's about reduced by half right now, so we're gonna add our brown sugar to it, and we're gonna cook this until it gets nice and syrupy. It should have big, slow bubbles. If you wanna temp it, it should be around 235, and then we're gonna add our cream, butter, vanilla, and salt. So until then, we're just gonna let it roll for about, I'm guessing 3 or 4 more minutes. But until then, you are really just gonna sit and watch it. The great thing about this caramel too is you can make it a day or 2 ahead of time if you want to. You can just leave it in the fridge and have it on hand, or if you have leftovers, just keep it in the fridge. It's also great with ice cream. And so while that's going, we're gonna get our pan ready. And so we're gonna be baking in an 8-inch square pan. We are gonna be lining it with parchment paper. And that is just gonna be able to help it pop out a little bit with a lot of upside down cakes. Not a lot, but some of them. If you don't line them, what happens is some of your caramel could cook too hard or just wasn't cooling right away, but it'll stick to the top of it and you'll lose some of it. So we're actually just gonna fully butter ours. You can use your hand, you can use a brush. I think it's easier just to use a napkin. And you just take some butter, and we're gonna go all along the sides too. And then with that, I've got a little bit of parchment paper that I've actually trimmed up, and it is gonna go right in the side. And when you do trim it, you're gonna want a little bit of overhang on it. And that is because we're gonna wanna be able to pull it out a little bit. What I like to do, because you can also see when you do some cakes that have a ridge on them, or pound cakes and you have it overlay, sometimes your parchment paper can actually flip back over onto it while you're baking. So the trick is you just take a binder clip and you just clip it down right on the side and you are good to go. And we're just gonna take a little bit more butter and just make sure we go over that parchment too. I'm actually gonna put this in the refrigerator, more so for anything so that when we put our caramel in here on the base, it's not super hot so it doesn't start interacting with our batter in any way that we don't want it to. Okay, so we're getting really close here. We're getting big, very slow bubbles, and it's starting to caramelize more than it was, and you can see that it'll start to be around the edges or in some of these, like, I almost call them bubble veins, where some of your bigger bubbles are, you see it getting a little darker. And when you're cooking regular caramel with white sugar, they always say like a dark amber color is what you're looking for, and no one knows what that is. And so if you don't, I say watch the first Jurassic Park movie, and any close-up of his cane with the weird amber thing with the mosquito in it is the color you're going for. You know, it's a weird reference, but it really helped me.
With the mosquito inside. until Jurassic Park scientists came along. Using sophisticated...
Okay, so I am liking where we're at. So I'm gonna take it off the heat, add all of our cream, and then we're gonna go back over that same high heat. Once I start to see some bubbles, a little bit of boiling, we're gonna turn it down to low. We're gonna let that simmer for about a minute or two, and we're just dissolving all of that sugar and caramel that was at the bottom that we just cooked. And I will use a rubber spatula just to help kind of move some of that off the bottom. And also, you can feel it. You can feel it kind of sticking a little bit, and that's just like your hard caramel at the bottom that you're trying to get up. Okay, and we're at a simmer here, so we're just gonna let that go for just a little bit. And when I say bring to a simmer, it's literally a low simmer. You're looking for just about 30 seconds to a minute. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this off now. Then off heat, I am going to add our unsalted butter, our vanilla extract, and salt. And you are just gonna mix that together just until your butter is fully melted. Okay, so it looks like our butter is fully melted, fully incorporated. So now we are gonna move on to the cake portion of this, but I am just gonna let this sit aside at room temperature for now and let it cool down. Okay, so now we're gonna start on baking of the cake. Important things to know: have a beer with you, much like when you cook with wine. When you cook with beer, you should also be drinking some. Everything should be at room temperature for this cake, so I would either let things sit out a few hours, or if it's butter, I'll pull it out the night before. You also want your eggs at room temperature. You don't think about that one as much, but if you're creaming together your butter and your sugar and then you add cold eggs into it, that will actually help your butter squeeze up and you'll get little chunks again. For our cranberries, we did a very rough chop on that. You can do it by hand, or you can just buzz it in the food processor. So we're gonna get started on this right now. We're gonna start by creaming together our butter, our sugar, and orange zest. So I'm gonna do sugar. I'm gonna do the zest of half an orange. You can do it with a microplane. If you don't have a microplane and you just have a peeler, you can use a peeler too. You just have to be careful about getting the pulp in there, which is the white part. So if you do use a peeler, just make sure you're being very gentle with it, and then finally chop it, or you can buzz it with your sugar in the food processor a little bit. And add our butter. The other important thing, and it is on the recipe, is when you're baking, it is scraping your bowl with a rubber spatula between additions. That's essentially that everything is getting evenly incorporated, especially on stand mixers. There is a little divot at the bottom of it around that sometimes your actual paddle won't touch. So scraping it just makes sure that you're getting everything off and everything evenly incorporated. We're gonna start this on low speed and then bump it up to medium. We're gonna cream it for anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes. You want it to be really airy. There's not a ton of butter in this recipe, so it won't get as fluffy as when you say cream for like cookies. So I'm gonna start on low right now just until it seems a little more incorporated, until our butter is kind of, it should look like very chunky potatoes almost. So now I'm gonna turn it to low speed and we're gonna add our egg. And for the egg, it's 50 grams, which is usually 1 large egg. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna whisk together our dry ingredients. I did sift them beforehand. So we're just gonna have our flour, baking powder, salt, some cinnamon. We're whisking that together, and that just means that it'll be evenly incorporated throughout the whole cake. Really easy, quick whisk. Okay, so this is all incorporated. I don't see any streaks of egg or any streaks of sugar. It's pretty uniform, very light, like in texture, but it's also a very light yellow color, but evenly all the way through. So we're gonna do a scrape of paddle or beaters, sides and bottom. And now we're gonna add the rest of our wet and dry ingredients. We're gonna do it in 2 sets. So we're gonna add half of our dry ingredients, and we're actually gonna mix our vanilla right in with our milk. And then after half of our dry, we'll stream in our milk, and then we'll add the second half of our dry to finish. When we do that, we are still gonna scrape between each addition. So we're gonna do about half right now. And when we're adding dry ingredients, we're gonna start on low speed. It's that same thing. If you jump to high, you're just gonna shoot flour over everywhere, and you also lose some of that flour too. And now we're gonna slowly stream in that milk and vanilla mixture. We'll do that on low speed. And we're gonna stream it right down the side. Try to go down the side of the bowl a little bit, or at least hit the side way down. If you just try to dump it right in, it'll splash with the paddle and it'll just make a mess. Okay, I feel pretty good about that. We're gonna add the second half of our dry ingredients in. Same thing, we're gonna start on low speed. Okay, and this is looking pretty good. I've not seen any lumps in it. We have a nice texture on it. The only things that I see that aren't bad are just specks of our zest, which is great. And we're gonna go ahead and assemble our cake. So we are gonna go grab that pan that we put in the freezer. So for our cranberries, you can use fresh or frozen. If you do use frozen, you do want to let them thaw a little bit. So we got our scale here. We're gonna make sure it's zeroed out. We're gonna go ahead and grab that caramel we made earlier. And the reason that we put this in the freezer is we want our caramel to set up a little bit. So you can make this in advance if you want, a day or two, keep it in a sealed container in the fridge. But if you do it right ahead of time like we're doing, if putting this in the freezer, it'll actually help it set up when you pour it in. So we are gonna do 125 grams right in the bottom. And then we're just gonna move this around a little bit so it's nice and even. And that looks great. Now we're gonna add all of our cranberries. And again, that is 225 grams cranberries, and it should be enough to make a very even layer on the bottom of your pan. It might seem like a lot at first, but there's just a lot of air in them because cranberries are kind of hollow. So we are gonna wanna really press that down, and the reason we're gonna press it down is because they will release a lot of juice and cook down, so it'll be a lot of space that is lost or almost deflating in the bottom of your cake. So just try to press them down into that caramel, into a very even layer, and that caramel will help hold them in place. And the other reason we're pressing it down is because when we pour our batter over it, you want these to be a pretty solid uniform layer so that none of the pieces try to float up into it, because then you just more have it speckled throughout your cake instead of having that nice red top. And now we're gonna take our batter, and as we pour it over, we're gonna kind of try to move over the cake as we do it, because same reason that we don't want it kind of pressed all of our cranberries down so they don't float up into it. If we have to manipulate the batter a lot, like we're spreading it a lot all over it, it'll still move some of those cranberries around. And then at this point you have two options. You can either just smooth it out with a spatula, which is just fine, or if you do have a small offset spatula, you can use that. Either or will work just fine. I like an offset. So what we're gonna do is you wanna do full spreads also. You don't wanna do a bunch of little movements. You kind of wanna have big fanning movements. And this is looking pretty good. I'm happy about that. And now we're gonna go into a 350-degree oven for about 40 to 45 minutes. Cool, so we're at 40 minutes, so we're gonna do a little test on it. We are gonna do not a poke test, but a top test where you just touch the top. We want it to spring back a little bit, so the sides seem good. The middle to me is still a little wobbly. See that it doesn't pop back right away. It's also starting to pull away from the sides a little bit, which is a great sign. So we're close. So I'm gonna put it back in for about 5 minutes. And the reason that we do that is if you did it with a cake tester or with a toothpick, since there's that liquid and the fruit in the bottom and you poked it, it might not come out clean, but it's not because the cake isn't baked, it's just because you have that caramel and liquid in the base. So that's why we're just doing a little press test. So we're about 45 minutes. We've got a nice color on top. And we're doing that same poke test that we did on the sides. So you just press down lightly and we see this. It is bouncing back up and it's not leaving indents. So we are gonna pull this guy right now. And we're gonna let that rest for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're gonna flip it out. So our cake has been cooling for 15 minutes now, so we're gonna flip it out. This is our moment of truth. So what I like to do is I will take a knife and just run it right along the edge. And then I'm gonna flip mine right out onto this cutting board because this is what I'm gonna serve it on. I'm gonna take my clips off. And then I'm gonna want it on this side. I'm gonna put a little sauce guy on that side. So I am going to center it where I want it. And this is the moment of truth. You're gonna pinch the sides and then you're gonna very quickly flip it, tap it a little bit, and then this is where these come in really nice. You can actually pull these out to the side a little bit. And that's how you know that it has released from the bottom. put that to the side. And then when you peel it off, I just like peel it back very slowly. You peel it off in one big chance, you have a possibility of ripping some of the fruit off. So you just go really slow across. And honestly, that's about the best you can do for peeling it off, if I do say so myself. I'm actually gonna take just a little bit of our caramel sauce that we made earlier. We're gonna do it right here in this little dish. That looks great. Serve it right side it. So now that our cake is cooled, we've cut it into ninths, so just 3 by 3. And we are currently in the Holden Room at Glass House, which is one of our event spaces. I'll show you the best way to eat this. I prefer a corner piece. I like the 2 sides because a little bit of that caramel goes up the sides and you get a real crunchy bite to it. And you just do a little bit of our caramel sauce right on top and just go right in. Yep. Yep. So what I love about this, especially with false pattern, is that the cranberries are so tart and you get that sweet caramel that already has a little bit of that orange in it from the beer, and you get that orange that carries through. There's a little bit of crunch, but it's like soft and tart on the top, and you get the beer flavor through it, but it's not overwhelming. It's a nice finish to everything, but it really carries through the whole cake. And if you also want to, you can glaze the cake as whole before people come over as a showstopper. Thanks everyone, and if you want to, you can follow us at Parallel on social media or check out our website. We have an event space and we have a cafe which will be coming back in summer of 2021. Also, if you want to follow Modist at Modist Brewing on all social media platforms, you can also get false pattern available at your local liquor store or in the tap room. Also, if you do make the cake, we'd love to see how it turns out, so please tag us in your stories or in your posts, like we said, at Modist Brewing or at Parallel. We'd love to see how it turns out for you. Thanks.